So, I think it's important for families to know that I see them and I get it. Although all our experiences are different and it really varies based on what our children are diagnosed with, I'm there with you and I really know what you're going through. And so I thought I'd share my own story. So my daughter, who is now 10 years old, has Rett syndrome. And when I first started this journey, I wasn't given a diagnosis until she was about 2.5. And during those early stages, she had developmental delay. And I remember being in this space of denial and just constantly wanting to be the fixer, the warrior parent, the person that was going to save her, right? And I know a lot of us parents do that. So we go and we find all the possible modalities out there to try and do whatever we can to help our child. And I feel like in those early stages, I was so focused on what wasn't there and on the fixing that I actually didn't see her. I didn't really see how magnificent and wonderful and beautiful she was. I wasn't really present to her being. I wasn't present to everything that was present, right? Her smile, her energy, how happy she was. I wasn't necessarily noticing those things because I was focused on what was wrong. And I think we all have this tendency to focus on what's lacking, what's wrong, what we don't have, and this is normal humanity. We all think of those things. Well, if I had this, I would be so much happier, right? And so when we're already in that kind of mindset, which I was, we're not really seeing our child through that clear lens. So that's that first piece, is that I wasn't really seeing her. And the other piece is I was suppressing my feelings. So I had learned for so long not to feel because feeling was painful. And I know a lot of people out there are going to, resonate with this, because I think a lot of people go through this where we just suppress because we don't want to feel. And, feeling is part of the healing, but I only learned that once I discovered the Annette Baniel method of neuromovement, which I then decided to study. So I went and trained for several years to become a professional, a practitioner, to be able to serve my daughter myself. Initially the goal was to be able to help my daughter. And then after I started working with the children, my heart just exploded and I just changed my career path. And what's important about this particular work and how it helped me as a parent in my own journey, and I think this is important, is talking about the parent journey, because we're often focused on the children, right? I think the important piece here was the somatic work. And for those who aren't familiar with somatic work, it's very much about body awareness. So you're becoming much more aware of yourself through the moving body in this particular case. So all of these subtleties that you may not have felt before, you will start to feel. And so as you start to expand your awareness and consciousness of self, even in your physical body, it actually opens you up to expand and feel so much more on an emotional level, start to connect to your intuition, connect to your inner voice. All these things that we may have suppressed in the past become much more within our consciousness. And so when I started doing this work, I really started to open up, and I found myself crying a lot because there was all kinds of emotions that were coming up to the surface that I had pushed down. It was almost like imagining a bottle that is full and then suddenly the cork pops off and everything just comes flooding out and you can't even control it, right? Because you're moving energy, you're moving blockages that are in your physical body, right? We talk about the physical self and the emotional self being intertwined, right? That you can't have one without the other. That's why we have holistic healing. And so for myself, I found the somatic work to be such a gentle way to enter the healing process, because if someone had asked me, you should really go speak to someone, at that time I would have said, what do you mean? I'm fine, right? Because I was the strong warrior
Yeah.
parent. I wasn't feeling. And so I thought I was just fine. But really, I wasn't fine. But I wasn't aware that I wasn't fine. So, I think this is where the next piece came in, is when I started to really open up through the somatic work. I discovered the conscious parenting with Dr. Shefali, and I did this training, and then I started going deeper on an emotional level. So now I was open to receiving that information and to start doing that introspection. So some of that, and when I'm talking right now, this is some of the work that I do with the parents. So some of that is building that self-awareness, becoming more self-compassionate, building that self-understanding. So understanding what you're going through, why you have certain reactions, why certain things are triggering you. What is that trigger? Where does it come from? What are certain patterns that we keep repeating over and over and over again that actually keep us in suffering? So these are all things, it's all about bringing awareness to the self. And so this is kind of the work that occurs with the parents, but the somatic piece is such a beautiful combination with the emotional piece, because some parents aren't comfortable. They're not ready to start opening those doors, or they're just not at a stage where they can really see those things. So it's a nice way to start building that awareness. So then the conscious parenting came, and I started writing books, and I started doing conferences, and I started working with groups and professionals, etc. So my daughter, and here's where I'll talk about her trajectory a little bit. So Rett syndrome is something that can progressively get worse over time. And so my daughter is non-ambulatory and nonverbal, so she's in a wheelchair, and she doesn't have intentional use of her hands. And she has seizure disorder and respiratory challenges that have led to multiple hospitalizations. And, the first 2.5 years, she was delayed, but her health was good. And then at 2.5, there was a huge regression that took away any skills that she had accumulated, which were few at the time. And she started having a lot of health issues. And so we really had to navigate that, right? And what I found really important for myself as a parent is the more you become aware of yourself, and the more you understand how to find that peaceful sanctuary within yourself, to find that balance, to find that peaceful space, it's extremely important to have the resilience to move through the chaos, because we navigate through a lot of chaos. Especially those parents that are listening today where your children do go to hospital a lot, are admitted a lot. It's difficult to be a parent and a professional, and moving through the stresses that can occur when you have a child that has health difficulties. And so I found that deepening that connection to self, so moving into more mindfulness, is something that I really started to practice.
Yeah.
And I really started committing to and understanding that self-care. And I know a lot of parents are going to be like, oh, I'm tired of hearing about self-care. But it's actually the only way that we can truly show up for our children is first by understanding ourselves and what's happening within ourselves. Because what happens within ourselves influences our children because they feel it. And I learned this when my daughter, she almost passed away last year. And we were in the ambulance on our way from one point to another, because we were actually at a cottage when this occurred. And we're driving to the hospital, and we're about 45 minutes away from the hospital, and she has a near-death experience. And we're in the ambulance, and all I can see is her saturation start dropping. And then they took me out of the van and put me in front so that I wouldn't have to witness more. But I was sitting there, and I closed my eyes, and I know she left her body for that short period of time. And I don't know how long, I can't even tell you how long it was, but I closed my eyes and I was just connected to her, and I could just feel peace. And I don't know where she went, but we have this very close bond with our children, mothers. And I remember the doctor in the back, because there was a doctor in the ambulance, thankfully, and she said, we have a pulse. And that, in that moment, it's like I snapped back into my body, and then the shock of the event just had my whole body trembling. And it was such a bizarre, it was so bizarre, right? Because it's almost like I felt her go somewhere beautiful, and I felt how beautiful it was for that, whatever amount of time it was. And then I was dropped right back into life, right? And during that specific period, it was for about a week's time. I had PTSD. I was traumatized by the whole event. I was really struggling, and I really had to find my center. And my saving grace was really moments of stillness and silence, moments to just be with myself. And I had to take a step away. I had to walk away at times to just recenter. That recentering is so key. About 2 weeks later, we had a second event where, I had just stepped out to do a few errands, and I was called back into the hospital because her saturation had dropped again and they couldn't get it back up. And I remember walking into the room and it was so, there was so much stress and anxiety. It was just such a dark energy. And they were basically telling me she's dying. And I walked in and I laid down in the bed with her and I stared at her in her eyes and I told her, Mama's peaceful. Feel my energy, you're safe. And I was really peaceful in that moment. I don't know how I did it, but it was just, I feel like all the work that I had done on myself and just learning to know what it feels like to be in that peaceful state
Yeah.
inside empowered me to be able to show up for her that day. And I think it's important for parents to understand this, is that she was the one struggling in that moment. I couldn't be struggling in that moment. I had to show up for her. I had to help her feel safe, and she needed to feel that, which means that I had to control what was occurring inside of me. And so in that moment, I laid down in the bed with her and I stared into her eyes and I stayed in that peaceful space. And it felt like there was this bubble around us. I couldn't hear anything around us. It was like just this crazy chaos going on around us. And I was staring at her and I just told her, I said, if you choose to go, it's going to be beautiful. But if you choose to stay, you have the power to heal. You just
Oh
need to
my
remember
gosh.
who you are. And I was just repeating to her how magnificent she is and that her eyes are just this mirror that, reflect so much beauty and light. And I just went on and on and on. Anyway, it felt like 2 hours, but it was only 30 minutes and her saturation came back up. I really truly feel like her and I are a team. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it really speaks to the importance of caring for the self.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't love myself enough to figure out how I was going to navigate during that time, not knowing that that was coming. But I
Oh,
took that time. And so I want parents to know it's important to take that time. We don't know what the future holds. And, it certainly won't look like this for everyone. I certainly experienced, the worst possible case scenario, but it empowers me to be able to guide families to share and communicate the importance of caring for the inner self, of finding alignment within ourselves, of understanding our own anxiety, of letting go of control, of
yeah.
being present. All these things really equip us to create that optimal learning
Mm-hmm.
environment for our kids. And I think parents often feel unseen and they want people to acknowledge that, yes, it's hard, right? It's not an easy path, but it's also important to remember that we have power
Yeah.
and that we get to choose. We get to choose how we're going to navigate. And when we choose to stay in that space of not facing our pain and not digging deeper, then we're actually prolonging our own suffering and it impacts the whole family. So when we don't choose ourselves and choose to
Yeah.
take that time, we prolong the suffering. We forget that piece, that it's through the pain that we release the pain. And it's not as scary as you may think once you start to really
Yeah.
unpack and move through it, right? It's a feeling, it moves through you, and you learn how to allow those feelings to move through you. And just to let you guys know, Gabby is doing really well. She's been in states of seizure free. She's doing really well. We're managing those secretions extremely well now. She's not had as many admissions. All this to say, one of the big messages I try and share
Yeah.
is that correlation between the parents and their healing, self-understanding, and their expansion, the correlation between that and the child's development. That this is a big message that I'm trying to share either through, platforms like this or other, because it's important for hospitals to start to understand the importance of supporting these families as a whole,
Yeah.
right? And so this is part of the work, but I do support parents through workshop form and I do have virtual programs. Parents can come in and dip their toes. And I do have a program that is about to come out, which is actually a combination of the somatic work and the deeper understanding of self and how to start creating that optimal environment for the child to really thrive. And this whole journey has inspired me to be able to be of service, and that brings me so much joy. I'm happy, I'm joyful. Yes, there are moments that are hard. And I think it's important to note this. We're not always in this happy, joyful party state, right? I have moments where I'm anxious. I have moments where I'm stressed. That's normal where we're overwhelmed. But it's this idea of understanding when those things happen and how to move ourselves out of it,
Wow.
right? It's becoming empowered to be in control of what's happening internally. I feel like as human beings, we're here to experience contrast. We're here to move through difficult things so that we can grow and expand. That's the whole point, right? And so when we can start to see that as this is an opportunity rather than something that is happening to me,
Yeah.
it really starts to change because you can see how that particular event or situation has really empowered you to move into that next phase of life. And I think for all those parents out there, if you have a child, that has a neurodiversity or that has, healthcare needs, severe healthcare needs, whatever it may be, you have that child because you can move through this. You have this ability within you. It's a matter of choosing. You get to choose the path that you want to take, but it's there for you. It's available to you.